when you talk about the path to peace and intervention, one thing that is important to recognize, this is very hard to intervene in someone's life. It's not easy and it's not short. It could be a multi-year heavily investment just to get someone to shift. What wisdom and advice do you give us?
It's pray. The path we have in front of us is a long-term healing path. When I say long-term, in the order of 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
There's that much damage that has occurred. We are so fractured, so polarized. The investment needs to be primarily local, needs to be primarily in younger generations, and any number of ways to be engaged. And it's a much long, probably a whole other podcast to talk about, like, what are those, long-term things, but just, I would say to those that are parents, educate yourself about these protective factors that you can build into your kids, about how to protect them from extremism. I have a whole host of recommendations in the book and in the appendices in the book. If you are a youth leader or a teacher, anybody that's engaged with youth, you have an important role here too. Investing in building resilience in our kids, grit. That's been a fun buzzword of late. Building grit into our kids, that actually really matters. Like the ability to experience failure and overcome it, not because you achieve perfection, but because we're not defined by our achievements. So building resilience in our kids is long-term effort, which will bear fruit and help those of us that are old and hard to change in our ways to start to see maybe we got it wrong, and these younger kids have a better way of seeing the world. So that would be my first, to re-engage in your local communities with your neighbors. Proximity really matters when we're actually talking to people. And they have skin, and you're literally flesh to flesh. It's really hard to otherize. It's really hard to label people. And inevitably, even though we are more sorted as communities now, inevitably, if you engage, particularly in an urban environment, if you're able to engage in some, non-political engagement, like volunteer at the soup kitchen or volunteer at the animal shelter, you're eventually going to run into people who have a different worldview than you on any number of topics. And that's really healthy for us to be curious and learn from people that are different than us. Mm-hmm. If you have the ability to travel and to get out of the United States, that's another really healthy way to be exposed to it's not all about us. It's not all about the United States. There's a whole other world out there. So all of the proximity to people different than us really helps. And then finally, I would say that if you have somebody in your life that you're really worried about, it is really important to seek help, to not brush it aside. Now, what should you be worried about? Somebody that's withdrawing, somebody that's communicating that they're contemplating violence against themselves or against others. It might just be an aside comment. They're not necessarily telling you all of their plans, but they might say it under their breath. Somebody that does have access to weapons would be a pretty big concern in that kind of context. And nobody is expecting a bystander, a parent or a loved one, to know whether that person poses a threat. But the plea is, please reach out and ask somebody to help you make that assessment. You can go to law enforcement. Law enforcement sometimes is limited in what they can do, and they might refer the individual to a mental health professional. And if you don't feel comfortable calling law enforcement, there are organizations that can help you think through whether the behavior you're observing is of concern. Parents for Peace is one of those organizations that I would recommend. There are also various spaces in schools, in states, some trained mental health professionals, but it is a weakness right now in the country. We don't have enough mental health professionals in general, and we don't have enough mental health professionals that are trained to know how to engage with at-risk individuals. So that is a known challenge in our moment. We just don't have enough trained counselors, but don't just brush it aside is my encouragement. Be persistent, try to find somebody who can help you make this assessment, and see if you can get that individual help before they might do something that causes them to lose their life or cause others to lose their life.